My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm 31 years old. I'm a physical therapist. And 72 hours ago, my father made a choice that he thought would save him money. But instead, it cost him absolutely everything. And when I say everything, I mean his reputation, his business, his freedom, and the one relationship he claimed mattered most, mine, and the worst part, the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it, is that he made that choice while I was lying in an ICU bed, unconscious, with a breathing tube down my throat and monitors beeping all around me. He walked into that hospital, looked at a doctor, looked at a bill, and he said 5 words that should have killed me. Let her go. We're done. And he signed a Do Not Resuscitate order with the same pen he used to sign birthday cards. No hesitation, no tears, just his signature on a line. And what he didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly known, because he'd spent my entire life underestimating me, was that I had already protected myself. I had already seen this coming. Not the accident, not the coma, but him. I had seen him coming. And 72 hours after he signed that paper, everything he'd built, everything he'd stolen, everything he thought he'd gotten away with, it all came crashing down so fast that he didn't even have time to pack a bag before the police showed up. Before I tell you what happened in those 72 hours, before I show you exactly how a man can destroy his entire life in less time than it takes to binge a Netflix series, I need to take you back, way back, to the moment this all started, because this didn't begin in a hospital. It began 28 years ago in a pediatric cardiologist's office in Boulder, Colorado. When I was 3 years old, and a doctor told my parents that their daughter had a heart condition, congenital aortic stenosis. That's the medical term. What it meant in plain English was that one of the valves in my heart was too narrow, blood couldn't flow through it properly. And if we didn't fix it, if we didn't do surgery, I wouldn't live to see kindergarten. So they fixed it, they opened my chest, they repaired the valve, they kept me alive, and the surgery cost $187,000. And my father, Richard Morrison, never let me forget it, not for one single day of my entire childhood. You cost us a house, Rachel. That's what he said when I was 7. I'd asked if we could go to Disneyland, like my friend Emma's family. And he looked at me across the kitchen table, his coffee going cold in his hand. And he said it like it was a fact, like it was something I needed to understand. You cost us a house. We could have had a bigger place. We could have had a yard, but instead we have medical debt and a kid with a scar. And I remember looking down at my chest, at the faint pink line that ran from my collarbone to my sternum. And I remember thinking that he was right, that I had taken something from them, that I owed them something I could never repay. And that feeling, that belief, it stayed with me. It grew with me. It shaped every single decision I made for the next 20 years. My older brother, Jason, never had to think about money. He got a new bike when he was 10. He got a car when he turned 16. He got his college tuition paid in full, all 4 years. No loans, no questions, no strings attached. He graduated from UC Boulder with a degree in business. No debt, no guilt, no scar on his chest reminding him that he'd cost the family everything. And when I asked my mom, when I was 14 and filling out high school elective forms, and I wanted to take an art class, but it required a fee. When I asked her why Jason got things and I didn't, she looked at me with this tired expression, like I'd asked her to explain gravity. And she said, Rachel, you know why? You know what the surgery cost. We're still paying it off. Your brother didn't put us in debt. You did. So you need to understand that things are different for you. And I nodded, because what else was I supposed to do? I was 14. I believed her. I believed all of it. I started working when I was 15. I babysat for the neighbors, 3 different families on our street, Tuesday and Thursday nights, sometimes weekends, $5 an hour, which felt like a fortune back then. And I worked at a smoothie shop after school, Java Juice on Pearl Street. I worked the closing shift, 4 to 9 p.m., 4 days a week, making A bowls and cleaning blenders and smelling like strawberries and chlorine every single night. And I saved every single paycheck. I had a bank account that my parents didn't know about. I'd opened it myself when I turned 16, and I watched that balance grow. 200, 500, $100,000, and it felt like freedom, like proof that I could take care of myself, that I didn't need them, because I'd learned by then that asking for money meant hearing about the surgery, about the debt, about how much I'd cost them. So I stopped asking. I just stopped. I bought my own school supplies. I remember standing in Target before junior year, picking the cheapest notebooks, the off-brand pens, because I was paying for it myself and every dollar mattered. I paid for my own prom dress, the 80 from a consignment shop, navy blue, too long in the hem. I wore flats so I wouldn't trip, and my mom didn't even ask to see it. She didn't ask about prom at all. And I went with a group of friends, no date, and I smiled in the photos, but I felt invisible, like I was watching my own life from a distance. And senior year, I bought my own used car with money I'd saved for 2 years, a 1998 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it, a dent in the passenger door from a shopping cart, a check engine light that never turned off, and a radio that only worked if you hit the dashboard at exactly the right angle. And it was mine. I paid $2,800 cash. I signed the title myself, and I drove it off the lot feeling like I'd accomplished something, like I'd proven I didn't need my parents. And maybe that was the saddest part, that I was 17 years old, and I was proud of not needing my own family. And when I graduated high school, when I got into Colorado State for their physical therapy program, I applied for every scholarship I could find. I wrote essays, I sent transcripts, I begged guidance counselors for recommendation letters, and I got some money, not enough, but some, and the rest I covered with student loans, federal loans, private loans, interest rates I didn't understand but signed for anyway. Because I had no choice, I had no help, and I worked 2 jobs all through college. I worked at the campus rec center, checking IDs and wiping down equipment. And I worked weekends at a physical therapy clinic, shadowing therapists, learning, preparing, and I never once asked my parents for a dime. Not for tuition, not for books, not for rent, not for anything. Because I genuinely believed that I didn't deserve their help, that I'd already taken too much, that the surgery when I was 3 had used up all the help I was entitled to. And I carried that belief like a weight, like a stone in my chest, right next to the scar. My father owned a construction business, Morrison Building and Renovation. He'd started it in his 20s. He built decks, remodeled kitchens, added sunrooms. He had a good reputation in Boulder. People trusted him, people hired him. And by the time I was in college, he was doing well, really well. He had 6 guys working for him. He drove a new truck every 3 years. He and my mom took trips to Cabo and Sedona. They weren't struggling, they weren't broke, but every time I saw him, every time I came home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, he found a way to bring it up. The surgery, the cost, the sacrifice they'd made, and I took it, I absorbed it. Because I thought that's what being a good daughter meant. Taking responsibility for something that happened when I was 3 years old, something I had no control over. But that didn't matter. It was still my fault. At least that's what I believed. The person who never made me feel like a burden was my grandmother, Ellen Morrison, my dad's mom. Ellen lived alone in a small ranch house in Longmont, about 30 minutes from Boulder 1847 Maple Drive, a white house with blue shutters and a front porch that sagged slightly on the left side. She'd lived there since 1981, 42 years in the same house, raised my dad and his sister there, my Aunt Carol, buried my grandfather there in 1995, heart attack, 63 years old, too young, and kept everything exactly the same. Same floral couch from 1988, same yellow curtains in the kitchen, same ceramic rooster collection on the windowsill, same smell of cinnamon and coffee that hit you the second you walked in, like the house itself was giving you a hug. And I started visiting her every Sunday when I was 24. Fresh out of grad school, May 2018, drowning in $80,000 of student loan debt, working at a sports medicine clinic in Boulder, peak performance PT, making $52 in a year before taxes, barely enough to cover rent and loan payments and gas and groceries. And I'd drive to Longmont every single Sunday, 30 minutes each way. I'd stop at King Soopers and pick up her groceries. The same things every week: whole milk, white bread, bananas, chicken breasts, vanilla ice cream. And I'd bring her groceries, I'd put them away in her fridge. I'd check her blood pressure, 140/85, a little high. We're watching it. I'd help her with her garden, tomatoes and zucchini and marigolds. She loved marigolds, bright orange ones. She said they kept the bugs away, and we'd sit at her kitchen table, the one with the vinyl tablecloth covered in daisies, and we'd drink tea, Lipton with honey, and she'd ask me about my week, about my patients, about whether I'd met anyone, any nice young man. Grandma, I'd say, I'm focused on my career, and she'd laugh, that raspy laugh she had. And she'd say, that's what I said too. And then I met your grandfather at a church picnic, and that was that. 48 years together, no regrets. And she never once mentioned the surgery. She never once made me feel like I owed anyone anything. She never once looked at me like I was expensive or damaged or broken. She just loved me. No conditions, no reminders, no debt. Just love, plain and simple. And I didn't realize how rare that was until I was sitting in a hospital bed, realizing that my own father had tried to let me die. Ellen was sharp. She remembered everything. She told stories about my dad when he was young, about how he'd been different back then, kinder, softer, before the business, before the money stress, before he'd turned into someone who measured love in dollars, and once, about 6 months before everything fell apart, she said something that I didn't understand at the time. Rachel, I've made sure you're taken care of. When I'm gone, you'll understand. There's a man named Arthur Briggs. He's my attorney. He'll contact you when the time comes. And don't let your father tell you otherwise. I smiled. I squeezed her hand. I thought she was just being sentimental. She was 81. I figured she was talking about her will. Maybe she was leaving me something small, a piece of jewelry, a photo album. I didn't think much of it. I didn't know that Ellen had spent the last 5 years of her life quietly building a fortress around me, protecting me from something she'd seen coming long before I did. Ellen died on a Monday in September, peacefully in her sleep. In that ranch house in Longmont, I got the call at work. I was in the middle of a session with a patient, a guy recovering from knee surgery, and my phone buzzed, and it was Jason, and he never called me during the day, so I knew something was wrong. I excused myself. I stepped into the hallway. I answered, and he said, Grandma Ellen's gone. She passed this morning. And I felt the floor tilt. I felt my throat close. I drove to Longmont immediately. I sat in her kitchen. I cried in the same chair where she'd poured me tea 1,000 times. And I didn't know then, I couldn't have known, that her death was the first domino, and everything else was about to fall. My father organized the funeral, small service, no fuss. Ellen had been a quiet woman. She didn't want a spectacle. He said, keep it simple. We're not dragging this out. And I stood in the back of the funeral home. I didn't get to speak. I didn't get to share a memory. I just stood there, silent, while a pastor who'd never met her read generic condolences from a script. And afterward, at the reception, my father pulled me aside, his hand on my elbow, his voice low. Ellen left the house to me and Jason. We're splitting it. We're selling it. It'll be on the market by the end of the month. And I nodded, because that made sense. Ellen's house. Split between her 2 grandchildren. Fair, equal, done. Except it wasn't true, not even a little bit. But I wouldn't find that out until I was in a hospital bed, tubes in my arms, and a lawyer named Arthur Briggs walked into my room with a folder full of documents that proved my father had been lying to me for months. 3 weeks after Ellen's funeral, October 14th, a Tuesday, I was driving home from the clinic. It was 6:30 in the evening, October in Colorado, the sun setting early, that golden light hitting the mountains, making everything look softer than it was. Road 36, 2-lane highway, dry road, no rain, no ice, clear skies, perfect conditions. And I was tired. I'd worked a full day, 8 patients, back to back, a knee replacement, 2 rotator cuff repairs, a marathon runner with IT band syndrome, a high school volleyball player with a sprained ankle, a 67-year-old woman learning to walk again after a stroke. I'd written notes. I'd filed insurance claims. I'd answered emails. I'd done everything I was supposed to do. And now I was driving home, windows cracked, radio on low, some indie station playing a song I didn't recognize, and I was thinking about dinner, about whether I had eggs in the fridge, about whether I had the energy to cook, or if I should just order something, thinking about nothing important, about the kind of mundane details that fill your head when you don't know you have 8 minutes left before your entire life changes. And that's when I saw it, or rather, That's when I didn't see it because it came from the right, from a side street, a stop sign that someone didn't stop at, a black SUV, a Chevy Tahoe, I'd later learn, driven by a 19-year-old kid who'd been looking at his phone, texting, not paying attention, doing at least 50 in a 35, and it hit the driver's side of my Civic. That little blue car I'd been so proud of, so hard that my car spun, once, twice. I remember the sound of metal crunching, glass shattering, the airbag deploying, hitting my face, and then spinning, the world turning sky, ground, and then stopping, sudden, violent, and everything going quiet. Or maybe I went deaf. I don't know. I don't remember the sound after the impact. I don't remember the glass. I'm told I was conscious for about a minute, maybe 90 seconds, long enough for a witness to call 911, long enough for the first responders to arrive, long enough for the paramedic, a woman named Angela, I'd find out later, to kneel next to my broken window and ask me my name. And I said, Rachel Morrison, my voice weak, shaking. And then I said, I can't feel my legs. And then I was gone, unconscious. And I wouldn't wake up for 4 days. And in those 4 days, everything I thought I knew about my family, about my father, about my own worth, all of it would shatter just like the glass from my car window. Severe head trauma, that's what they called it, traumatic brain injury, subdural hematoma, which means bleeding inside my skull, pressure building, brain swelling. The kind of injury that kills you if they don't operate immediately. And they did. They opened my skull. They relieved the pressure. They saved my life. But I wasn't awake for any of it. I was in a coma, and I stayed in a coma for 4 days. And during those 4 days, while I was unconscious, while machines breathed for me, and IVs fed me and monitors, tracked every beat of my damaged heart, my father made a series of decisions that he thought would save him money. Decisions that he thought no one would ever find out about. Because he believed I wasn't going to wake up, he believed I was going to die, and he was already planning what came next. I was at Boulder Community Hospital, the same hospital where I'd done part of my clinical rotation in grad school. I knew half the staff. I'd worked with them. I'd eaten lunch with them. I'd covered shifts during the holidays, and now I was a patient, and the emergency contact on my file, the name that had been there since I was 18, because my father insisted, was Richard Morrison, next of kin. They called him at 11 p.m. on the night of the accident. He arrived at 11:40, and he didn't come to my room. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask if I was in pain or if I was going to make it. He walked straight to the billing office, and he asked one question: how much is this going to cost? What happened next? I learned from a woman named Dr. Sarah Patel. She was the attending physician in the ICU. She'd been working at Boulder Community for 12 years, board certified in critical care. She'd seen everything: car accidents, strokes, heart attacks, overdoses. She'd saved lives, and she'd watched people die, and she was the one managing my case. And she was standing at the nurse's station at 11:45 p.m., updating charts, drinking cold coffee, and that's when she saw my father walk out of the billing office. And she knew who he was. She'd seen him on my emergency contact form, Richard Morrison, father, next of kin, and she watched him approach. And she told me later, months later, when I was recovering, when I was strong enough to hear it, when I asked her to tell me everything, every detail, because I needed to know, I needed to understand how a father could do what he did. And she told me that my father looked calm, not upset, not worried, not like a man whose daughter was in a coma, but calm, almost businesslike, like he was there for a meeting, not a medical emergency. And he walked up to her, and he said, "You're Dr. Patel, you're handling Rachel's case." And she said, "Yes." And he said, "I need to understand the financial situation here. The surgery was expensive. The ICU is expensive. How long is she going to be like this?" And Dr. Patel explained, carefully, professionally, that I was stable but critical, that I needed time, that brain injuries were unpredictable, that the swelling was under control, but we needed to monitor me, that we'd know more in the next 48 hours, that some patients woke up quickly, some took weeks, some never woke up at all. And my father nodded, taking it in, processing, and then he asked, "And if she doesn't wake up, what then?" And Dr. Patel said, "Then we'd have a conversation about long-term care, about options, about quality of life. And my father nodded again. And then he said, she doesn't have a healthcare proxy. I checked. She never filled one out. So that means I'm her father. I'm the decision maker. Correct? And Dr. Patel confirmed that yes, that was correct. Protocol dictated that next of kin makes decisions when there's no proxy on file. And that's when my father said it. His voice steady, emotionless. Let her go. We're not paying for this. She's been expensive her whole life. This is just more of the same. We're done. I want you to write up a DNR. Do not resuscitate. And Dr. Patel told me she felt her stomach drop. She felt her hands go cold. And she stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, to say he was overwhelmed, that he was in shock, that he didn't mean it, but he didn't take it back. He just stared back, waiting for her to comply. And she said, Mr. Morrison, your daughter is stable. She has a good chance of recovery. And he said, I don't care about chances. I care about reality. And the reality is that I've been paying for her existence since she was 3 years old. And I'm done. Write up the order. And Dr. Patel, because she had no legal choice, because he was next of kin and I had no proxy on file, at least none that she knew about, handed him the form, the Do Not Resuscitate order. DNR, the form that every doctor hates, the form that means giving up. And my father took it, he read it. He didn't ask questions, he just read it. And then he signed it, Richard Morrison. 11:52 p.m., October 14th, do not resuscitate, do not intubate if the current tube fails, no CPR, no extraordinary measures, no heroics. Let nature take its course. His handwriting was steady, no shaking, no hesitation, no moment where his hand paused over the paper. Nothing, just his signature, clean, final, done. And when he finished, he handed the clipboard back to Dr. Patel. He asked if there was anything else he needed to sign. She said no. And he said, thank you. Like she'd helped him with paperwork at the DMV. And then he walked to the elevator. He pressed the button, he waited, he stepped inside, and he left. He left the hospital. He didn't visit my room. He didn't look through the glass. He didn't touch my hand. He didn't say I love you or I'm sorry or I'll be back. He just left. And Dr. Patel stood at that nurse's station holding that DNR form. And she told me later that she felt sick, that she wanted to call security, that she wanted to tear up the form and pretend it never happened. But legally, she couldn't. He was next of kin. I had no proxy on file. His decision was valid. It was binding. And if I crashed, if my heart stopped, if I stopped breathing, they would do nothing. They would let me die because my father had signed a piece of paper. Dr. Patel stood at that nurse's station, and she told me later that she felt sick, that she wanted to call security, that she wanted to refuse the DNR. But legally, she couldn't. He was next of kin. I had no proxy on file. His decision was valid, except it wasn't, because what my father didn't know, what Dr. Patel didn't know, until she opened my employee file from when I'd done my clinical rotation, was that I had filled out a healthcare proxy form 2 years earlier. I had designated someone to make medical decisions for me if I couldn't. And that person was not Richard Morrison. It was my best friend from grad school, a woman named Cara Lynn. And Cara lived in Denver, 45 minutes away, and she had no idea I was in the hospital, no idea I was in a coma, no idea my father had just signed an order to let me die. Dr. Patel stood at that nurse's station, and she told me later that she felt sick, that her hands were shaking, that she set the DNR form down on the counter, and she stared at it, at my father's signature, at the words "Do Not Resuscitate," and she thought about me, about Rachel Morrison, 31 years old, physical therapist, whole life ahead of her, lying in room 4012 with a breathing tube and a bandage around her head and machines keeping her alive. And she thought about my father walking out, not even looking back, and something didn't sit right, something felt wrong. Not just morally wrong, but procedurally wrong, because she'd worked with me during my clinical rotation 3 years ago. I'd spent 6 weeks at Boulder Community, shadowing in the ICU, learning, and she remembered me. She remembered that I was thorough, that I was organized, that I asked good questions. And she thought, a woman like that, a healthcare professional like that, wouldn't she have a proxy? Wouldn't she have planned for this? And so Dr. Patel went to the staff office. She pulled my employee file from when I'd done my rotation, and she flipped through it, contact information, certifications, background check, and there, stapled to the back, was a healthcare proxy designation form, filled out, signed, dated November 12th, 2 years ago, and the name on the form wasn't Richard Morrison. It was Cara Lynn, and there was a phone number, Denver area code, and Dr. Patel picked up the phone, and she called. It was 1:30 in the morning, Wednesday, October 15th, and Cara answered on the second ring, her voice groggy, confused, hello, and Dr. Patel said, is this Cara Lynn? And Cara said, yes, who is this? And Dr. Patel said, this is Dr. Sarah Patel from Boulder Community Hospital. I'm calling about Rachel Morrison. There's been an accident. Rachel is in the ICU. She's in a coma. And you're listed as her healthcare proxy. We need you here immediately. And Cara said, what happened? Is she okay? And Dr. Patel said, she's stable. But there's a complication. Her father signed a DNR 2 hours ago, but you have legal authority, and that DNR is not valid. I need you here to override it. And Cara said, I'm on my way. And she hung up, and Dr. Patel told me that she sat there, holding the phone, staring at that employee file, and she felt a wave of relief, so strong that she almost cried. Because I had protected myself. I had seen this coming. Maybe not the accident, maybe not the coma, but I had known that my father couldn't be trusted, and I had made sure that someone else, someone who actually cared about me, would make the decision. And Cara was in her car within 10 minutes. She told me later that she didn't even change. She was in pajama pants and a hoodie. She grabbed her keys. She grabbed her wallet, and she drove. She drove from Denver to Boulder, going 80 the whole way, maybe faster. She didn't care about speed limits. She didn't care about tickets. She just drove, and she arrived at 20:20 a.m. She parked illegally in the emergency bay. She ran inside. She found the ICU, and Dr. Patel met her at the door with the DNR form in her hand. And she said, her father signed this 2 hours ago, but you have legal authority. You're her healthcare proxy. This DNR is void. What do you want us to do? And Cara didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. She didn't ask for time to think. She just said, tear it up. Do everything you can, save her, keep her alive. I don't care what it costs. And Dr. Patel smiled, a real smile, the first one she'd had all night. And she said, okay, and she tore up the DNR right there in front of Cara. She ripped it into pieces and dropped it in the trash. And she filed the proxy paperwork. She updated my chart. She called the nursing staff. She said, Rachel Morrison has a healthcare proxy. Cara Lynn is the decision maker. The DNR is void. We are providing full care. And I stayed on life support. I stayed in the ICU, and 36 hours later, Thursday afternoon, October 17th, I woke up. I woke up on a Thursday afternoon. October 17th, the tube was gone. My throat was raw. My head felt like it had been cracked open, which it had, and the first person I saw was Cara, sitting in a chair next to my bed. Her eyes red, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. And when she saw me blink, when she saw me try to focus, she started crying. She grabbed my hand. She said, you're awake. You're okay. You're here. And I tried to talk, but my voice wouldn't work, so I just squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back. And I didn't know yet, I didn't understand yet, that my father had tried to let me die, that Cara had saved my life, that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't imagine. Dr. Patel came in an hour later. She checked my vitals. She asked me questions. What's your name? Where are you? What year is it? And I answered all of them, slowly, painfully, but I answered. And she smiled. She said, you're doing great. Rachel, you're going to be okay. And then she paused, and she said, there's something you need to know. Your father was here the night of the accident, and I need to tell you what happened. And she told me everything, the DNR, the signature, the fact that he'd left without seeing me. And I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process it, trying to understand how a father could do that, how my father could do that, and I couldn't. I still can't. Cara stayed with me for the next 3 days. She slept in the chair. She brought me food I couldn't eat. She updated my friends. She handled everything. And on the third day, Saturday, October 19th, a man walked into my room. He was in his 60s, gray hair, navy suit, leather briefcase. And he introduced himself as Arthur Briggs, attorney at law, and he said, I represent the estate of Ellen Morrison, your grandmother. I'm very sorry for your loss, and I need to speak with you about some urgent matters regarding her will. And I nodded, confused, still groggy from painkillers. And he sat down, he opened his briefcase, and he pulled out a folder, thick, organized, labeled. And he said, "Your grandmother left very specific instructions. She knew this might happen. She prepared for it. And what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult, but you need to hear it. Your father has committed fraud, and we're going to stop him." Arthur explained that Ellen had left her house to me, only me, not Jason, not split, just me, the house, the land, everything. It was mine, and she'd made that decision 5 years ago. She'd updated her will, she'd made it ironclone, she'd hired Arthur specifically because he was thorough, because he didn't miss details, and she'd told him, if anything happens to Rachel, if Richard tries anything, you stop him. And Arthur had been watching, and 3 weeks ago, my father had done exactly what Ellen predicted. He'd forged documents. He'd claimed the house was being split. He'd listed it with a realtor. He'd accepted an offer. He'd scheduled a closing. And he'd done all of it without telling me, without my signature, without my knowledge, because he thought Ellen had left the house to both of us. And he thought he could convince me to sign or forge my signature if I didn't. And he'd already started spending the money. He'd made a down payment on a new truck. He'd booked a vacation. He'd paid off credit cards. And none of it was legal. None of it was his. And Arthur had already filed a motion with the probate court. He'd already contacted the realtor. He'd already flagged the sale as fraudulent. And now, with me awake, with me able to confirm that I'd never agreed to any of it, Arthur was ready to take my father down. I listened, my head pounding, my hands shaking, and I said, "What do I need to do?" And Arthur said, "Nothing. You just need to heal. I'll handle the rest. Your grandmother made sure you were protected. She loved you more than you know." And he left, and I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to absorb it. My father had tried to let me die, and he'd stolen my inheritance, and he thought he'd get away with both. And I realized in that moment, lying in that hospital bed with a scar on my head and a machine still beeping beside me, that I had spent 28 years believing I owed him something, believing I was the problem. And I was wrong. I didn't owe him anything. I never did. He owed me, and he was about to pay. Arthur moved fast. Within 24 hours, he'd filed an injunction. The house sale was frozen. The realtor pulled the listing. The buyers were notified. The deal was dead, and my father, who'd already spent $30,000 of the anticipated proceeds, was now facing a financial collapse and potential criminal charges. Arthur contacted the district attorney's office. He provided evidence, forged documents, falsified signatures, fraudulent real estate transactions, and the DA opened an investigation. And on Monday, October 21st, 72 hours after my father had signed that DNR, a detective showed up at his house. Detective Mark Holland, Boulder Police Department, and he knocked on the door at 9 a.m., and my father answered, and Detective Holland said, "Richard Morrison, we need to talk about your mother's estate and some irregularities we've discovered." And my father, for the first time in his life, had no words, no excuses, no control. Detective Holland brought him in for questioning, voluntary, no arrest, not yet. And my father sat in that interview room, and he tried to explain. He tried to say it was a misunderstanding, that Ellen had told him the house was being split, that he'd acted in good faith. But Arthur had already provided the will, the real will, notarized, witnessed, filed with the court, and it was clear the house goes to Rachel Morrison, no ambiguity, no split. And Detective Holland asked him, "Did you sign documents claiming you had authority to sell this house?" And my father said yes. And Detective Holland asked, "Did Rachel Morrison give you permission to do that?" And my father hesitated, and then he said no. And Detective Holland said, "That's fraud, Mr. Morrison, and I'm recommending charges." And my father's face went white. Word spread fast. Boulder's not a huge town. People talk. My father's business clients started hearing rumors. Church members started asking questions. And within a week, Morrison Building and Renovation lost 4 contracts, 4 big jobs, remodels that would have kept his crew busy through winter. And the clients all said the same thing. "We don't feel comfortable working with you right now. We're going in a different direction." and my father called them. He tried to explain, but no one wanted to hear it because the story was out there, the story that Richard Morrison had tried to let his daughter die to avoid medical bills, that he'd forged documents to steal her inheritance. And whether it was completely accurate or not didn't matter. The damage was done, and his reputation, the thing he'd spent 30 years building, was gone. Jason called me on Tuesday, October 22nd. I was still in the hospital, still recovering, and his voice was tight, clipped, and he said, "Did you know about this? Did you know what Dad did?" And I said, "I know now." And there was a long pause, and then he said, "He's saying you're lying." He's saying Grandma Ellen told him the house was split. And I said, "Jason, I have the will. I have the lawyer. I have the evidence. Dad lied. He forged documents. He tried to steal from me." And Jason said, "This is going to destroy him." And I said, "I know." And he hung up. My father tried to reach me on Wednesday. He called the hospital. The nurses blocked him. He tried texting. I didn't respond. He sent an email, subject line, "We need to talk." I deleted it. And finally, on Thursday, October 24th, exactly 1 week after I woke up, he showed up at the hospital. He walked into my room, and Kara was there, and she stood up. She said, "You need to leave." And he ignored her. He looked at me and he said, "Rachel, you're making a mistake. You don't understand." I was trying to help. And I looked at him, my father, the man who'd measured my worth in dollars my entire life, the man who'd signed a paper to let me die. And I said, "You signed a DNR, Dad. You walked out of this hospital and you let them write an order to stop saving me. You didn't help. You tried to kill me." And he opened his mouth and nothing came out. And Kara called security and 2 guards walked in and they escorted him out. And that was the last time I saw him in person. The district attorney filed charges on November 2nd, forgery, fraud, attempted theft, all felonies. My father hired a lawyer, a good one, expensive, and his lawyer tried to negotiate, tried to claim diminished capacity, financial stress, misunderstanding, but Arthur had built an airtight case, and the evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures, falsified documents, a clear paper trail showing intent, and the DA wasn't interested in a plea deal. They wanted a conviction. They wanted to send a message, and my father's lawyer told him the truth. "You're going to lose, and you need to prepare for prison." The trial was set for February, but my father didn't make it that far. In December, he had a breakdown, a full collapse. He stopped showing up to job sites. He stopped answering calls. His crew quit. His truck got repossessed. The bank foreclosed on his house, and Jason called me, and he said, "Dad's living in a motel. He's not doing well." And I felt nothing, no sympathy, no guilt, nothing, because I'd spent 28 years carrying his guilt. And I was done. I was finally done. Arthur got the house transferred to my name officially in January. Clear title, no liens, no disputes. And I drove to Longmont. I parked in the driveway. I walked up to the front door. I turned the key and I stepped inside. Cinnamon and coffee. That smell, Ellen's smell. And I walked through the rooms, her furniture, her photos, her life, and I sat on her couch, and I cried, not because I was sad, but because I was free for the first time in my entire life. I was free. I didn't owe anyone anything. I had a home. I had my life. I had my grandmother's love surrounding me. And I realized that Ellen had known. She'd always known. She'd seen what my father was. She'd seen what he was capable of. And she'd spent the last years of her life making sure I'd be okay, making sure I'd be protected. And she was right. She was so right. My father took a plea deal in February. He pled guilty to all charges. The DA dropped the prison time in exchange for 5 years probation, full restitution, community service, and a permanent criminal record. He paid back every dollar he'd taken. He sold everything he had left, and it still wasn't enough. The rest he'll be paying off for years. And he moved to Grand Junction, 2 hours away, to live with his sister, my Aunt Carol, and I heard this through Jason, who heard it through Carol. I never called, I never visited, I never reached out, because forgiveness isn't something I owe him, and closure isn't something I need. I closed that door myself, and I'm not opening it. I went back to work in March, part-time at first. The clinic welcomed me back. My coworkers threw me a small party, cake, balloons, hugs, and I worked with patients. I helped them recover. I helped them rebuild. And I realized that's what I was doing too, rebuilding not from the accident, but from 28 years of believing I was a burden. And I never was, the burden was him. It was always him, and I'd been carrying it for him, and I was done. Kara and I are still best friends. She visits me in Longmont every other weekend. We sit on Ellen's couch. We drink tea, we talk about nothing and everything, and she never lets me forget that she saved my life, and I never let her forget that I'm grateful, and I am. Every single day, I'm grateful. I still think about my father sometimes. I think about the DNR, about his signature, about how easily he gave up on me, and I don't hate him. Hating him would mean he still has power over me, and he doesn't, not anymore. He's a man who made terrible choices, who measured love in dollars, and found himself bankrupt in every way that matters. And that's his story, not mine. Mine is about a grandmother who loved me enough to protect me, about a friend who drove through the night to save me, about a lawyer who honored a dying woman's wishes, and about a woman who woke up from a coma and realized she didn't owe anyone her life. If you're watching this, if you see yourself in my story, if you've spent your life believing you're a burden, if someone has made you feel like you owe them for your own existence, I need you to hear this. You don't owe anyone your health. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't owe anyone your silence. And you sure as hell don't owe anyone your life. My grandmother taught me that, not with words, but with actions, with a will, with a lawyer, with a plan, and I'm teaching it to you now. Set the boundary, walk away, protect yourself, because the people who truly love you will never make you pay for being alive. 72 hours, that's all it took for my father to lose everything. 3 days from signing that DNR to losing his business, his reputation, his freedom, and me. And the irony, the thing that keeps me up at night sometimes, is that he did it to himself. I didn't destroy him. Arthur didn't destroy him. The legal system didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself the moment he decided that money mattered more than I did. And that decision, that one choice, it cost him everything. And I didn't lift a finger. I just woke up. I just survived. And that was enough. I live in Ellen's house now. I've repainted the kitchen. I've updated the garden. I've made it mine. But I've kept her photos on the walls, her cinnamon candles in the drawers, her memory in every room, because she saved me, not just from my father, but from the belief that I was unworthy, that I was too expensive, that I was too much. She showed me that I was enough, exactly as I was, scar and all, and I carry that with me every single day. My father called me once, 6 months after the plea deal. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was small, broken, and he said, "Rachel, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I need you to understand I was scared, and I listened to the whole thing, and then I deleted it, because an apology without change is just manipulation, and I don't need his apology. I don't need his understanding. I don't need anything from him. I needed those things when I was 7, when I was 14, when I was 21. But I don't need them now. I'm 31. I have a home. I have a career. I have people who love me without conditions. And that's enough, more than enough. If you stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or if it reminded you of yourself, leave a comment. Tell me what boundary you've set that changed your life. Tell me what moment made you realize you didn't owe someone your suffering. I want to hear your story. I want to know I'm not alone in this. And you're not alone either. We're all out here, rebuilding, recovering, realizing that survival isn't selfish, it's necessary. And sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones we need to walk away from. And that's okay. That's more than okay. That's brave. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Real stories, hard stories, stories about people who survived things they shouldn't have had to survive. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's carrying guilt that isn't theirs, someone who's been told they're too much or too expensive or too broken, send them this, because maybe, just maybe, it'll be the thing that helps them realize what I realized, that you don't owe anyone your life, not even family, especially not family. You owe yourself peace. You owe yourself safety. You owe yourself a life that isn't measured in dollars and debts and surgeries from 28 years ago. And once you realize that, once you truly understand that, everything changes, and I mean everything. And it changed for me 72 hours after my father signed that paper. And it can change for you too, right now, today, this moment. Because the door isn't locked. You just have to be brave enough to walk through it. And I promise you, I promise, there's a whole life waiting on the other side. A life where you're enough, exactly as you are. And that life, that freedom, it's worth fighting for. It's worth surviving for. And it's worth everything.